down in my hobo bed, pick apart my weary head. The desert clay is brown and red. Would you stay a while?
Yes, I'll stay a little while, just because you make me smile. Then I'm moving on, I've got to leave this mining town.
And in this town where I reside, untying knots that I have tied, writing songs and tanning hides, not knowing where I'm bound.
Arizona, California, Nevada, I should have warned you. Where those three rivers meet, it's there that I'll be found. I'm done rambling, I'm wandering all alone. I want to find a place to call my home. Well, I'm not one to turn around, trace your tracks across the ground.
When I hear that whistle sound,
I know it's time to go. And there are things we can't control, change a heart deep in one's soul. Just like trees we're growing old, so we've all been told. But as for me, I do believe I'm younger with each breath I breathe. I don't want to beg you please, I'd rather you just know. The windmill sings her siren song, soon we'll both be moving on. Desert's not where we belong, surely help us grow. I'm done rambling, I'm through wandering all alone. I want to find a place to call my home.
call my home. Call my home.
Hey y'all, Kelly Moody here. Welcome to the Ground Shots podcast, a podcast that explores our relationship to ecology through conversations and storytelling. Welcome to a new episode of the podcast, number 84 with Jeff Wagner. Everyone wants to eat the Colorado River. The music you just heard as the opening for this episode is a new song by Jason Day West and Darian Lane. Super grateful for them letting me put that song here as the intro for this new episode. The Colorado River is a pretty large watershed that takes up a big part of the western United States. It stretches from Wyoming to Mexico, and all the social political boundaries that we have drawn since colonization across the landscape of the West have affected this river and all of the ways that we want to use this river. And there's so much at play with how important this river is to our whole society. And as Jeff will mention in this episode, this river is a microcosm for so many other rivers in the world that are being mistreated or overused or overtaxed, and poor decisions are being made about the river with big, huge consequences, and this one is no exception. Jeff studied the Colorado River in college and has a lot of knowledge about the ins and outs of this watershed, and believe it or not, everything that we discuss in this episode, he's just speaking out of himself. There was no script in front of him. He didn't have these things written down. It's definitely one of these things that he knows a lot about. He's the founder of Groundwork, a nonprofit that is in Paonia, Colorado. He primarily teaches a farm program through the nonprofit with a fellowship where people can come and learn about sustainable agriculture and growing food. But the field ecology classes that I have been teaching part-time this summer and last summer are through Groundwork as well. So we mention both of those in this episode. And so if you are somewhat familiar with my work, you know that I have been teaching these classes in the summer months. So if you remember, Gabe Crawford was kind of a co-host for a little while back in, I guess it was 2020, right in the heart of the pandemic. He and I did the Colorado Trail Project together. He started this ecology program and is sort of the heart behind it. And so I've been teaching it alongside Nikki Hill, who's been on the podcast 4 times now. I've lost track. We both have been kind of doing our own version of it, but with the same bones and framework of how Gabe started it. several years ago. So we base it out of Western Colorado and teach the classes in the high country or at other public land spots and sometimes private land spots across the Western Slope. So we kind of talk about that here and there, but my ecology programs and Jeff's farm internship, the Colorado River is one big puzzle piece to understanding ecosystems in the West and human relationship with land in the West and the current politics behind public lands in the West and even private land ownership in the West. Everything is connected to the Colorado River. And so whenever he comes and does these talks for my programs, which I think I've heard this talk 3 or 4 times now with visuals, so this is a unique for us to not directly have him showing visuals as he's speaking for this. I've learned something new every single time he teaches it. So I was like, I really think that you should share this talk or lecture discussion on the podcast to share with the world like what's really important about this watershed and how it's kind of a dire current situation here in the West. And some places people are talking about it for sure, and other places people have no idea what's going on. So after hearing this lecture so many times, I was just like, I really would like people to hear more about this situation. And I know there's other scientists and writers and thinkers and people speaking about this, indigenous folks trying to get their water rights that they should have been having the whole time. There's a lot of other voices talking about this watershed right now, and perhaps after this episode we'll explore it more with other people. I feel pretty inspired to do that after editing this one and researching a ton for the resource list for this episode. So that is a cue for you right now. If you have the capacity, I know a lot of people listen while doing other things like dishes or errands or canning things because it is summer or doing art or whatever it is that you're doing while you listen to this. If you have the capacity, I would go to my website of sedgeandsalt.com or the Substack that I write on groundshots.substack.com and look for the post for this episode. And on it, I have several maps that will be helpful if you listen to this episode to look at and refer to as you're following along. Because normally, like I said, Jeff has visuals for this lecture and this talk and conversation, and it will help you really see the big picture and all the little tendrils of this watershed if you can put those maps in front of you. Even if you glance at them at the beginning or somewhere throughout this talk, we have both the map that John Wesley Powell originally suggested that they use for drawing state lines when they were trying to decide about drawing state lines. And he was suggesting to draw them along watershed boundaries, and they thought he was ridiculous. And they took out a ruler and just drew straight lines across the West. And those lines have had really detrimental effects to the health of this watershed, as you will find out in this episode. So the second map is just the normal, social political boundaries that we currently have today, and the watershed imposed over that. So you can kind of see how the watershed runs into a lot of different places and over a number of state lines. And each state has a different way of managing the water, and they're all interconnected, and it gets really complicated, especially since people are using more water than what's actually there, and rivers are living beings that fluctuate. So all of this we get into in this episode. Also at the end of the blog post or publication post for these episodes, there's a pretty big resource list that I put together with the help of Jeff and some other folks. So you can take some time to watch some videos, documentaries, read some articles, look up some books to buy, and in connection to water in the West or the current legal battles going on in the West around the Colorado River. All of that's in the big resource list for this episode. So I would also take the time and explore that. I know in past episodes I have spent a lot of time on the resource list, and some of them really call for it, and this is one of those. So I appreciate your engagement and your care about this issue, and I'm super excited to put this out there. If you would like to support the podcast, all the time I put into it is unpaid. And I keep doing it because I just really care about this project and getting these voices and stories out there. You can donate via Venmo, Kelly-Moody-6. You can become a Substack paid subscriber. You can share the podcast to your peers. You can do a review on iTunes, which would be really awesome. But really, financial support would be great. This costs money for me to run, and your support really helps keep it going. And so far, there have been definitely periods where people are really contributing and helping in that way, and I really appreciate it. So groundshots.substack.com, Kelly-Moody-6 for Venmo, and there's other ways you can also support the podcast if you look on the publication posts or the show notes for these episodes. Traditional Tanners is a company run out of Oregon by Matt Richards that teaches online classes on hide tanning, as well as sells equipment online and hides online. I've had Matt Richards books for years, and it's really helped me in my journey learning hide tanning since about 2012. And I recently took a couple of his online classes, and it's been a really cool thing to see people learning pretty intense processes through his teaching. And I highly recommend you go check out what he's doing and order tools and really explore the world of tanning hides naturally. Braintan.com is how you can find the ongoing classes he's teaching, primarily on bark tanning online. We still have space in the upcoming field ecology course in the high country on the Grand Mesa this summer in early August. Please reach out to me if you have any questions about the course. You can also read more about the course on Groundwork's website, layinggroundwork.org, and you can find the ecology courses under a whole section there, and you can really see the kinds of stuff we get into: society and ecology and philosophy and ethnobotany and wild tending. A lot of the stuff that we've explored on this podcast over the years, I bring to an in-person learning experience and training, so please do come out. We have space for more folks. I have a 7-day one coming up in early August, and Nikki Hill is teaching 2 4-day courses at the end of August and early September. And this is kind of the only thing she and I are mainly offering in this way this year. I always think I can do more, but this is kind of the opportunity to get to hang with us and really dig in. So come on out, immerse yourself, and attend an ecology course. So I'm here with Jeff Wagner. Maybe you could introduce yourself a bit more, and then we'll go into more details from there.
Yeah, my name's Jeff Wagner, and I spend a lot of my life thinking about culture and cultural relationships with land and food and water. And right now I'm running a nonprofit organization called Groundwork, and our mission is really about trying to fill in the gaps in our society's conversations about sustainability and climate change, because almost all those conversations are focused on infrastructure and policy. There's this gap that exists where, like, when you really look at what's being talked about as like, oh, this is what our world needs to move forward in a more sustainable way, it's kind of a disappointing conversation, because all the solutions are predicated on this answer people have already come to what the future looks like. And the answer is like, the future looks just like the present, except with some different machines. A lot of the work we do at Groundwork is trying to expand people's imaginations a little bit and create spaces where we can explore what it looks like to shift culture as a kind of an imperative for a sustainable future. And it's also, there's no easy answer. It's a much more complicated exploration than like slapping solar panels on a lot of stuff.
Right.
But I think you get down to the root of a lot of the issues our society faces right now.
There's not one linear solution. There's a lot of layers that are a part of it, and incremental pieces, and things that are bigger and things that are smaller. That I feel like that's something that I see in the farming relationship, exploring like what it means to be growing food, and also exploring what it means to look at ecology and study ecology and make things with our hands. And all of that is trying to explore what these solutions could look like by being more in connection, I guess, in different ways, without being like, we have the answer, it's going to save everything. I don't think anyone, because there isn't one answer.
Yeah, there's definitely not one answer.
we're in Paonia, Colorado. That's kind of where Groundwork is oriented, but you do things outside of there too. You started this on the Front Range.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I grew up over there, and so I used to work abroad a lot, teaching these international kind of traveling study abroad programs, and a lot of the impetus to start Groundwork was working with environmental leaders in other countries and hearing like the solutions that they were proposing for society, which is like essentially pushing back against kind of like the homogenizing world of modernity and international development. And they're like, no, our traditional ways are going to be better for us in the long term, and you can bring some new elements into that, but a lot of the solutions to the world's problems that you see coming out of places outside the quote-unquote developed world, they just look really different. And when I would talk to those people, I mean, a lot of them are my mentors, and I'm like, how do I like have this conversation in the US? And the ones who had been to the US were like, I don't know if that's possible. And I kind of wanted to prove them wrong. But talking about the Colorado River, it's something that when you really dive into it, it's a representation of a way of seeing the world. Mm-hmm. Because the way that the river has been managed and changed by people over the last 100 years, it's kind of like this model of what the world should be like. And that model, like as it began, that's been copied and pasted all over the world. Through Groundwork, we run this educational farm program. It's a 7-month food systems fellowship, and on Wednesday afternoons we have these like academic seminars. The last 2 weeks we've been focusing on the Colorado River and like water and agriculture, and then the next couple weeks we're talking about development and modernity and like the international space. And really what I've come to is like everything that we've talked about in the Colorado River is like it's a microcosm of the whole world, and like this way of seeing the world as something that humans should be in total control over.
Yeah, for my ecology classes, Jeff has come a couple times and done, I think I've heard it 3 or 4 times now, your Colorado River talk, and I'm always getting something new out of it every time. And when I teach my field ecology classes through Groundwork, it is, you know, obviously we're doing botany and plant ID and foraging and like learning about wild medicinal plants and that kind of stuff. And we're talking a lot about the politics of learning plants. And so when you come and do the talk, I feel like it brings everything together in this place, but also the fact that this place is a mirror for a bigger societal pattern or issue, and that by studying this place and the Colorado River as an ecosystemic framework, or like as a system in itself, can teach us a lot about like how what we're doing right here in these small ways are connected to bigger things. So you studied the Colorado River as your college, that was like your main focus in college. So this is something you've really got into.
I went to CU Boulder and studied hydrology and Western American Studies, and was in this really amazing Western American Studies program with Patty Limerick, who, if you're interested in Western history, she's the person to look to in terms of like breaking down a lot of like the like how we got to where we are in the Western U.S. So,
where is the Colorado River?
Dear listeners, it's time now to go on a journey. Let's go.
And why does it matter that we know where it is?
The Colorado River, I think if you look at a map, you'll see that it begins in Rocky Mountain National Park in northern Colorado, and it flows southwest into Utah, into Arizona, along the Arizona-California border, into Mexico, and then it empties into the Gulf of California. And that's where the Colorado River is on the map. But I think that when I start teaching about the Colorado River, the first thing I always like to share is that the Colorado River, it's not really just a watershed. it's something that, like, the way people have interacted with it over the last 100 years, it's fused itself into what it means to be an American in this way that's really, it's very hidden, and most people have never thought about it. But I always start, not always, sometimes I start by asking people, what do you imagine healthy food to look like? And the answer is usually something like, I'm like, imagine, like, not just like a general healthy food, but like a day worth of healthy food. What do you eat? And so, dear listeners,
people often respond with a salad as one example of healthy food, right?
I mean, yeah, you could, if you're listening to this, you could take a second and close your eyes and imagine, like, what's the healthiest meal you can imagine, if we're thinking about, like, healthy access to food. Well, what would it look like? What's for breakfast? What's for lunch? What's for dinner? And yeah, it's probably like a salad at least once or twice during the day with, like, lettuce and spinach. There's a lot of vegetables, and that idea of what healthy means has become divorced from seasonality, because you want that salad every day of the year. You want, if there's like an eggplant and tomato dish, you want that in the winter. You want it in the summer. You want it in the spring. You want it in the fall. And people don't think about the seasons at all. Because healthy food it's so tied to the industrial food system in the U.S. that in the wintertime is powered by the Colorado River. The whole river is really managed around this one area of the Colorado River Delta. It's in Southern California, Southern Arizona. In California, it's the Imperial Valley. And this is the most productive agricultural land in North America, if not the entire world. It's river delta soil that the Colorado, it's one of the siltiest rivers in the world. And so over the countless millennia, it's just deposited all this river sediment into what used to be the Gulf of California and is now hundreds of feet deep, beautiful topsoil. And it's in the driest place in North America too. They get like 3 inches of rainfall a year in the Imperial Valley. And so when you divert the Colorado River to irrigate that, what you have is a beautiful setting for huge scale industrial agriculture that in the winter has ideal growing conditions for most vegetable crops.
It's primarily a winter growing area because in the summer it's super hot. Right?
Yeah, I think I looked at the weather map the other day and it was like 110.
Ugh.
So they do grow some perennials. It's mostly date palms. If you see dates being grown in North America, it's usually in Southern California in the Imperial Valley. But yeah, so this agricultural area has influenced our entire conception of what food means. Because it's like, chances are if you're buying one of those like boxes of greens in the winter from the grocery store and it has baby spinach or it has a lettuce mix in it, more than likely it was grown with Colorado River water and shipped to you. Whether you're living in Maine or Montana or Florida, like the food goes everywhere because our country is a large homogenized food system.
It's very dependent on California and the Mediterranean climate of the Central Valley and the Imperial Valley.
Mm-hmm.
But the Imperial Valley is not technically in the Colorado River watershed, which was what's crazy about it. Like,
currently no, but there's this giant lake in it, the Salton Sea, that it's an artificial lake. It was created accidentally when people were trying to divert a portion of the Colorado River. They like cut into the bank, and essentially the entire flow of the river, this was the early 1900s, the entire flow of the river for about 7 years emptied into the Imperial Valley and flooded it, creating the Salton Sea.
The Salton Sea used to be an ancient lake there, though, way back, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's... So the river...
then it was gone for a long time.
Yeah. The river has changed course over time. But in the 1800s, the Salton Sea did not exist.
Whoa.
And today it does exist because of this...
It's super toxic and you can't even touch it.
Agricultural runoff, yeah. it's another thing. But yeah, that whole region, it's like, it's a part of us. We eat the Colorado River, and it's in our minds as part of what it means to be a healthy person. So yeah, both like those ideas that come from the river, they transcend the watershed boundaries, but also the water itself transcends watershed boundaries, because the Colorado, it's really the most overtaxed river system maybe in the world, at least in North America.
You had named some other rivers in the world that are also really, really overtaxed.
I mean, it's hard to name a river in the world that's not overtaxed right now.
Right.
I think the one that I have the most experience with is the Mekong River in Southeast Asia. And I've worked in that river basin teaching about water issues. But it shares a lot in common with the Colorado in that it goes through 7 separate political entities. The Mekong goes through 7 countries. The Colorado River goes through 7 states. And no one can agree on how to manage it, because everybody wants the water. The water is a source of like drinking water, agricultural water, hydropower, recreation.
Domestic use.
And in the Mekong River case, it's the source for protein for about 60 million people. It's the largest freshwater fishery in the world, or at least it used to be. I was there in 2019, which it seems like the year that the fishery really started to collapse, and people were going out in their boats and coming back with nothing.
Just like that.
Yeah, and that's like one of the biggest rivers in the world. It's huge. People call it the Amazon of Southeast Asia. But yeah, they built a big dam across the river on not on a tributary, but on the main river. And when I was in college, that was the prediction. It's like, you build one more of these dams on the main river and the fishery will collapse. And sure enough, the fishery collapsed.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly, like, there's been predictions made about the Colorado River
it's been
for
teetering.
decades. Like last year on the Colorado, there's 2 major reservoirs on the river, in addition to like hundreds of smaller reservoirs. But the biggest ones are Lake Powell and Lake Mead, and they're above and below the Grand Canyon. And Lake Powell is one that it's drying up. And last year it almost got to the point where the water dropped below the outlet of the dam. It's a level they call dead pool, because the river would end at Lake Powell, which is hundreds of miles from the ocean. And it would cut off all of Southern California from water.
So it's like a dire thing. We've created systems that our whole country in the world in a lot of ways depends on.
Yeah.
This very fragile, not thought out from the beginning system that at any moment could collapse.
Yeah. And so last year it almost got to that dead pool level, and everyone was kind of astonished, but it's like, it's been written about for decades, and the predictions that were spot on. They're like, we're going to reach dead pool in the mid-2020s. And, well, we're there. And we're just about to dead pool, too. So the Colorado River, before it got dammed into oblivion like it is now, it was a river that had this like hydrological profile that looked like just like a big needle poking through the page in like May and June, where like that's the runoff. It would spike so high, and then some tributaries of it would almost dry out in the fall. Just because the Colorado is fed by snow melt coming out of the Rockies, and when that's all done, then the water is gone. Mm-hmm. And some of the rivers, they'll flow through the fall, but especially in the southern part of the river basin, like once that spring snow melt is gone, there's really not much left.
There were a lot more beavers, which were they're like little micro dams everywhere, micro recharge stations everywhere, but that's different. That's very different than the large scale dams that we have in place now.
But if you can imagine you're coming out and you want to do irrigated farming, that hydrologic profile of like giant runoff and then totally dead river, it just doesn't work for you, because you need the water through the summer. Like right now, I mean, we're on the banks of the North Fork River here, and the water's dropping already, and we haven't hit the hottest part of summer. So we need that water in August. And so the way to do that is to store it somewhere. start building dams and flatten that water cycle out. And so people started building dams. And the first major dam on the Colorado was the Boulder Dam, now called the Hoover Dam. It's outside of Las Vegas, and it's I think still the largest reservoir in North America. It was built in the 1920s. Lake Mead, it's only about half full right now, but it's tons of water. And they built it because the Imperial Valley was flooding. And they're like, we can't, like, here's this big, like, fertile plain of soil, and we can't farm here if the river's just going to, like, jump its banks and flood at, like, hundreds of thousands of cubic feet per second every year.
Which is what created that soil in the first place.
Yeah.
But we don't want that variable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to control the river, and so you put up a giant dam that's going to deliver the water when you want it and stop the flood when you don't want the flood. And it totally changed that area and created this agricultural economy that we now depend on as a country.
It's so interesting that in the ecology classes we talk a lot too about, like, well, why have the landscapes changed in modern times compared to the past? And especially when it comes to riparian areas, if we are trying to control the water so much, the plants are gonna suffer, the land suffers, the fertility of the land suffers, the animals suffer, everything suffers if you don't let the rivers pulse and move, you know. The cottonwoods and willows suffer, and so it's this chain reaction. It's a cultural paradigm. Like you said, it does ultimately come down to things like what are we told we need to be eating to be healthy, rather than maybe being interested in and engaged in knowing what we can eat in the ecology, in the wild landscape, as also a part of our diet. But there's a lot of stuff around that too, like, oh, that's bad food or dirty food, or that's not really food kind of stuff too. So it's interesting, like, turning away from that and then relying on industrial ag, which means we have to control the rivers. Yeah. Really has this huge large scale impact on wild ecologies too. So.
Yeah. And it's all like the Colorado River is all being controlled, not for people who live in the watershed necessarily. If you look at a map, I mean, we'll find a good map to attach to the website for this episode. But when you look at a map of the Colorado River Basin, what you see is that there's almost no large cities in the river basin itself. I mean, the largest city that's actually on the banks of the Colorado River, I think it might be Grand Junction, Colorado. Which is about 50,000 people. It's just a rugged landscape it's not an easy place to live. In the river basin, there's Tucson and Phoenix, which they're kind of on like a separate branch of the river that doesn't flow into the Colorado until it almost has reached the ocean. So it's a little bit separate case.
Wait, is it the Gila? Or no, Phoenix. What's the river?
Yeah, the Gila.
I think
so.
Phoenix.
The Phoenix is at the intersection of the Verde and the Salt rivers, and I think the Gila flows through that valley as well. But part of me wants to say that the Gila comes in a lot lower. Okay. But see, this is why I need that map.
Because you just, like, your brain just has it, and you start drawing it, and you're like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah.
But yeah, the Colorado, it's all piped. So earlier I said that the Colorado River, like, its water it's not just used in the watershed, and that's because there's so many different people who are taking water from the river and either piping it through tunnels under the mountains, so it gets piped. Colorado, just the state of Colorado, has 55 trans-basin diversions in it, either from the Colorado River Basin or to the Colorado River Basin. Some of them are between different parts of the river basin, like you'll take water from the Gunnison River and pipe it into the Uncompahgre River, both of which drain into the Colorado, but people want to do the agriculture in a different valley.
That's so crazy. Like, what?
But the number of rivers that get water from the Colorado, it's the Platte River, which flows through Denver.
And that's on the other side of the Continental Divide, actually, right? The Platte River?
And so these are going, there's tunnels through the mountains, or people will, like, build a ditch that takes water from the high mountains, and then the ditch will go through a mountain pass, and so they'll like redirect water that way from one side of the mountain range to the other through a mountain pass.
So that's what happens on the Front Range.
Mm-hmm.
So the Continental Divide, if people don't know, is like this arbitrary, well, it's a line where literally, like, if the water drop falls on this side of the rock, it goes to the Mississippi River in the Gulf of Mexico, and if it falls on this, literally on this side of the rock, it goes all the way to the Gulf of California. So in Colorado, there's definitely a mountain, there's a line on the Colorado Trail when I hiked it a couple years ago. You're along a part of it for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And they even have signs everywhere. This is the Continental Divide. So technically, yeah, the Colorado River watershed is on one side of the divide.
Yeah.
But people are
it's on the west side.
Taking water over the mountains to the other side.
Yeah.
In large amounts.
In the state of Colorado, 80% of the water falls on the west side, but 80% of the people live on the east side. So people want to live on the east side. The climate's a little bit more mellow. It's flat land. The west side, the climate's more extreme. It's like crazy mountains, and it's just a harder place to live. So
things are so geographically intense over here.
Yeah, it's a hard place to travel. But so people have been pulling water. So water goes to the Platte River through Denver. Water goes into the Arkansas River, which flows out through Pueblo, and it's used a lot for agriculture in eastern Colorado. Water gets pulled into the Rio Grande drainage for use in like Santa Fe and Albuquerque area.
And that's a separate river system than both Mississippi River Delta and Colorado River. Rio Grande is its own.
Yeah, and that forms the southern border of Texas for a large portion of that state. And water is pulled upstream to get to Phoenix and Tucson. So it gets pumped back uphill. And water is a lot of the conflicts about water use in the Colorado River they started in California in the early 1900s, and LA was one of the big players. LA gets about a third of its water supply from the Colorado, and they pump it up and over several mountain ranges to get to the city.
Wow.
Yeah.
They take water from the eastern Sierra zone too, right?
So it's about LA's water supply is about a third from the Colorado, a third from the Owens River Valley in the eastern Sierra, and then a third like more local supplies around LA.
Wow.
But yeah, people there understood a long time ago that water is power and started building huge tunnels and pipes and pumps to make that happen, the city.
So everybody wants something from the Colorado River.
Yeah.
But
and then with the LA piece too, it's really interesting because LA also gets water from further north in the state. And so even though the Colorado River water doesn't travel north from LA, it's still related to the water systems in the Central Valley.
Yeah.
Because there's like, you can imagine that LA is this big gravity well that's trying to pull water to it. And if it can't get it from the Colorado, it has to get it from other places further north.
I lived in California, or at least traveled around and bopped around California for like 5 years or so, and I got really into studying the watersheds and the plants, and it's like this. I mean, I'm from the South, and people they're like, oh, California. They have all these assumptions that it's this one big liberal enclave. It's not like that at all. It's like its own country.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got the Sierras, these high mountains that are on the east side of the state, that create a desert on one side and then a Mediterranean climate on the other. And like every single one of those rivers that come out of the mountains towards the Central Valley, where all of food is grown besides the Imperial Valley, they're all dammed, and then they built a whole system based on a certain predicted rainfall and predicted thing too. But they're all overusing the water from all of those rivers in the Central Valley, and there's some of the dams are failing, the fisheries are failing, then there's been mining through all the mountains, and so then the rivers have a lot of pollution. Yeah, it's a very precarious system as well, but California is, it's very post-apocalyptic being there, in a lot of parts of the state. It's like, this is going to be interesting when it does collapse, because it's not sustainable, just like the Colorado River situation isn't either. Because people sometimes ask, like, well, if they take an ecology program with me, like, how is it relevant to where I live? Like, if I'm studying Rocky Mountain ecology or, like, plants of Colorado, I'm like, but it is. I mean, LA is taking water from the Colorado River. There's all these things that are woven together. And water is one of those things that connects us, connects places. And we're even moving the water beyond where it really would be. And,
yeah. I mean, LA, on the Colorado River, LA is competing for water with Denver. And
It's crazy.
Yeah, they're not anywhere near each other. And they're both in separate watersheds. Neither of them are in the Colorado River basin. But then they're also competing for water with lettuce that gets shipped to New York City. And, like, the Colorado River, it's just everywhere. It's ubiquitous. And it really... I mean, I think that, for me, the name, the Imperial Valley, it's the Valley of Empire. And the Colorado River is a lot of what has made possible the empire that we live in. That one, I mean, rivers in general have done that. It's like the hydropower from the Columbia River is what made all the airplanes during World War II and, like, powered the U.S. military.
The Columbia River is a whole other... It'd be cool to do podcasts on all these different rivers.
Yeah.
Because the Columbia River has, like, nuclear madness stuff happening. There's so much politic with the Columbia, too.
The empire that we live in is really... It's founded upon, like, control of these rivers. And we overlook them so much now. Because, like, that empire and the kind of fabric that we live in is... it's just second nature to us. Of course I can go to the grocery store and buy anything whenever I want.
And so many pieces to it, like capitalism as a cultural meme, you know, private land ownership as a cultural meme. We get into this stuff in the ecology classes, and I'm sure you talk about this in the farming program too, because we're living in capitalism and we have to figure out how we can subvert it while also living in it.
Even faced with that, with, like, something like a water shortage causing Lake Powell to reach this dead pool level, like, as soon as the reservoir was dropping, and this was a very real possibility last year that the Colorado River would run dry through the Grand Canyon, and that like, the water resources that Arizona and California needed wouldn't really be there. And it started to get national attention, but then as soon as we had a big winter, a lot of snowfall,
last spring.
Yeah. Now there's more water in the reservoir, and it's just totally dropped off the public radar. It's like it's not talked about anymore.
For another year, and then it'll come back again.
Yeah, but it's still coming for us. Like, what we have is just not sustainable. We have growing population in a shrinking river basin, and at the same time, all the other people who are trying to pull water out of the river need more of it.
Can you explain a little bit? This is something I think the first time you did the talk really hit for me, like, because I think a lot about lines and boundaries and borders and political, you know, private land ownership. Oh, on this side of the fence, this is one thing, and on this side of the fence, there's another thing, you know. How they, you know, the drawing of the state lines and then the laws that got created around that on top of the Colorado River without even considering the river's own beingness, you know, how that's trickled down to affecting things today. And I know that's hard to fully do without a map in front of you, but people can visualize it, because I think the state lines and then all of the, like, agreements and laws and, like, things around the state lines are a huge piece to the problem of the Colorado River. Yeah,
so if you rewind 150 years, maybe a little more, there's this character named John Wesley Powell. He's a one-armed Civil War veteran who goes down the Colorado River, and he's the first European American to descend the whole length of the Colorado River. And yeah, he's, like, mapping it and surveying it, and he goes back to Washington and reports to the government. I mean, he did this on the government's dime. And he goes back and says, if you're going to incorporate this region into the United States, you need to draw the state boundaries along watershed lines. And the Colorado River, that should be a state. And everyone thought he was crazy. And you can find, if you go online, you can search for the maps that he drew. And starting at about the 100th meridian, which is like halfway through like Kansas, Nebraska, and the Dakotas, it's the line where to the west of it, there's not enough rainfall to really do agriculture unirrigated. And to the east of it, you can grow stuff from rainfall.
At least European style
agricultural farming.
Yeah, and Central Pueblo and people did their own thing.
I mean, there's still a lot of dryland agriculture in Colorado. It's just that they're not European crops. It's millet. And yeah, so it's more nuanced, but that's kind of the line that you're looking at. And yeah, John Wesley Powell drew this map saying, cool, if this is going to be the empire and we need to expand westward, here's your state boundaries. And of course the powers that be, or that were, they drew square lines instead. They just said, you know what, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, whatever these things are, they're just going to have straight line boundaries. And it chopped up. I mean, it both created political entities that have to deal with unnatural water problems, where you have, like, the state of Colorado encompasses 7 major watersheds, and it's the headwaters for all of them.
Yeah.
And so they're managing the headwaters and trying not to anger people downstream, but the state of Colorado has to govern interstate agreements around all these watersheds. And the shape of those agreements follows the borders of the states. So the Colorado River, the agreement that governs it currently, is called the Colorado River Compact. And it dates back to 1910.
Okay. The state lines were drawn when, do you remember?
I forget exactly. I mean, Colorado became a state it's called the Centennial State because it was 100 years after the U.S., so that's 1876. And Arizona, I want to say it was 1912?
Oh, God.
1908?
So recent.
Yeah. Yeah, Arizona might be the youngest state outside of Alaska or Hawaii. But, yeah, so these state lines were drawn already when this river compact was made to govern the river. And essentially what the river compact said was, we've measured the flow of the river, we know how much water is there, and the way it should be divided is between what they call the upper basin states, which is Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, and New Mexico, which is where all the water comes from. That's where the mountains are, where the snowpack falls. So that's the upper basin. And then there's the lower basin states, which is Nevada, but we can kind of discount Nevada because they got a very tiny portion.
People think Vegas is like such a huge polar of the water, but it's nothing compared to the Imperial Valley.
Yeah. But then Arizona and California make up the lion's share of the lower basin. And then a couple years later, they added in Mexico, too, because, oops, we forgot that there's another country the river goes to.
And through all this, they didn't include any of the indigenous peoples and the reservations and their supposed water rights they're needing to.
Yeah. But so, yeah, you have this upper basin, lower basin division, and the way that water is measured in the West is in acre feet, which is an acre of land 1 foot deep in water. It's a lot. It's hundreds of thousands of gallons. It's a lot of water. But it's about what's required to grow irrigated crops on that acre. Is an acre foot. So it works. And the upper basin was awarded 7.5 million acre feet per year, and the same 7.5 million was given to the lower basin. So it's 15 million acre feet per year.
Was determined during a time when they had a particular kind of technology to measure this, and maybe during a wetter moment, right, you were saying? It's
like one of the wettest 10-year periods in recorded history and in tree ring history. So, like, reconstructing historical flows, like, that's just not what we can expect, is 15 million acre feet. And then Mexico later was awarded 1.5 million acre feet.
So really taking an average over a long period of time would have been a better way to do it, but they didn't have time to do that, I guess, or know how to do that. So.
And I think there's also not a willingness to acknowledge the cycles of nature, you know. But so you have a situation now where there's 16.5 million acre feet that are allocated to use. And that would be draining the water down to the last drop. But so within that system, there's a couple legal structures that were set up to help govern the water. Because when you look back at like the 1800s, the amount of users of river water on the Colorado River is very small. It's hard to divert water out of the Colorado. And so you have some agricultural users here and there, but it's really not that much. And as people started building larger diversions out of the river starting in like the mid 1800s, this law was set up that is summarized by the phrase first in time, first in right. So basically the people who started diverting water from the river sooner have priority.
And that's still in place now.
That's still in place. And so when you have the right to use water out of the river, they call it a water right, and it's attached to a date. So like the farm where we are running our educational program, I think it's 1881 water right. So the Ute Reservation in western Colorado was closed by the U.S. government in 1880, which is a whole complicated history. Some people say that it was closed legally. Some people say that was like a coercive move by the government. But yeah, the Ute Reservation was closed in 1880, and 1881, first orchards are planted in Paonia.
So closed, like the whole western part of Colorado was supposed to be for the Utes.
Yeah, it was all a reservation.
Yeah, we were talking about that with doing the Uniweek ecology class too, because there's a bunch of history books for that particular area where the people were already moving in before the Utes even left, and it was this whole thing with the sheep and like, yeah, the grazing, and everyone was just scrambling in to get their piece, and it wasn't a good scene.
Yeah. Not a good scene. But yeah, those water diversions started really early. So we have the oldest water right. I mean, our farm is renting land from this larger land holding, and that farm has the oldest water rights on the North Fork of the Gunnison River.
Because the family's been because it's been in that family for so long?
No, they bought it from someone else. It's just that was the site of the first orchard.
Because the Grange Road is the oldest developed, settled area in the town, or in this zone, this valley. Mm-hmm. So the oldest water rights are right there along Grange Road.
Yeah. And so that water has been used on that farm continuously since 1881.
So the dilemma in that rule, there's so many reasons why doesn't make sense, but is that people have to continue to use their water, or they lose their rights and they can never gain that level of water rights again because of it's first in kind. But then the people are having to use the water in really weird ways sometimes, or irresponsible ways. Somebody was saying during one of my classes, their neighbor just waters their ponderosa pines in the middle of the day to just say that so use the water so they don't lose it. And I'm like, that's so like...
Yeah. So if there's a couple phrases in water world. There's first in time, first in right, and there's use it or lose it. It's like the law says you have to put the water to, quote, beneficial use. And that if you stop doing that, then someone else can file a petition and say like they should lose their water right. And if that happens to enough people, then like maybe some of those younger water rights could get water. But as it is right now, like when the river starts to drop this time of year, like the snow is mostly melted off the mountains, and as the river starts to come down, some of the ditches around here are going to have to get shut off, the younger ditches, to keep the water going for the older water rights. So the legal structures that are built around the river have really determined the whole landscape in the river basin, and especially that upper basin, lower basin divide. So the dividing line between the upper and lower basin is set at this place called Lee's Ferry, which it's like one of the only places to cross the Colorado River between like Moab, Utah and the Imperial Valley in California. I mean, the river enters it goes into the Grand Canyon. There's a series of Cataract Canyon, Glen Canyon, Marble Canyon, Grand Canyon, Black Canyon, and for almost 1,000 miles, the river it's in like some of the biggest canyons in the world.
You can't just get across them easily. They're crazy canyon systems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Lee's Ferry is a spot, it's like just upstream from the Grand Canyon, and it was a spot where you could cross the river, and so they could measure water there in like the early 1900s, and so that was set at the dividing line, and conveniently it's right at the border between Arizona and Utah. And that the law says you have to deliver, the upper basin has to deliver 7.5 million acre feet every year past Lee's Ferry. And then that's their only responsibility. And as a really clear example of how these kind of arbitrary laws have shaped the landscape in the river basin, when you ask this question of like, well, how can those upper basin states deliver all this water at the right time of year? The only answer is they had to build a giant reservoir, and they did it about 10 miles upstream of Lee's Ferry at Glen Canyon. So the Glen Canyon Dam, it creates Lake Powell, which is the second largest reservoir in the country.
So Glen Canyon Dam, that's what the Earth First folks were fighting against, and Monkey Wrench Gang, and
yeah, one of the most controversial dams in the world, and for good reason. Like, it's, as dams go, it's a terrible idea. It's in a baking hot desert. The surface area of the lake is huge. If you look at a map, Lake Mead and Lake Powell are both in the hot desert, but Lake Powell has a lot more surface area than Lake Mead, even though Lake Mead has a higher volume capacity. And more surface area means more evaporation. And so you lose a lot of the river, 5% maybe, to evaporation.
I thought it was a higher number than that, but maybe to look that up, I don't know.
We can look it up. There's also the sandstone around there is porous, and the water just soaks into the sandstone. So you lose a bunch of the river to evaporation in Lake Powell. And it also dammed this ecologically significant canyon, which is
culturally significant.
Significant. I mean, when you see the photos of like the ancestral sites that went underwater as that was flooded, it's kind of unreal. And part of the reason why that was allowed to happen was it was traded. That canyon, so in the 1950s there was this big dam building movement, but there was also the budding environmental movement in the US. And there's this character named David Brower who he became the president of a hiking club called the Sierra Club, and he transformed it into the largest environmental organization in the country. And the reason why that there's a Grand Canyon today instead of a giant lake is because he put this big campaign on. He took out full-page ads in the New York Times that said, like, as they were proposing dams in the Grand Canyon, these ads said, would you also flood the Sistine Chapel to get closer to the ceiling? And it's this kind of turning point in the environmental movement where it starts to gain a lot of steam because people are starting to look at what's happening and the consequences of runaway growth and development, and they're like, we should save some of this stuff. And this is like before the Wilderness Act, before a lot of the major environmental preservation that we see today. This is like kind of at the start of it. And so after the Grand Canyon dams were overturned, they were looking at building dams in Glen Canyon. And then there's this place called Echo Park, which is at the confluence of the Green and the Yampa rivers, further up in the watershed. And Glen Canyon, at the time, I mean, it's in such a remote place. I forget how many people they say had been there in the preceding 100 to 200 years, but it's like 100 to 200 people. it's so remote, and so no one knew about Glen Canyon. But people had been to Echo Park, and David Brower had been there, and so he traded Echo Park for Glen Canyon, basically in this compromise of like, let's just build one dam, you can have Glen Canyon.
But he was the president of the Sierra Club, and he had sway over...
Well, he had built the Sierra Club into the largest environmental organization in the country, and at that time, yeah, he did have sway because he represented so many people.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the power of advocacy groups, is in membership numbers. Like the Sierra Club, it's over 1 million members right now, which it's a lot, maybe like 1.2 million. It's a lot of people. And you compare that to other large lobbying groups, it's like the NRA and the AARP. Those are the two largest like membership groups in the country, and I think they're around like 10 million.
Wow. So
to have over 1 million, like it's a pretty large group of like dues paying members, and you represent them, and you have their ear when you say like, this congressperson is going to do this bad thing, your members listen. So there's political power to be gained from these grassroots efforts, and at that time, yeah, that's the sway that he had, is he could say, I'm going to compromise with you and we'll only have one of these.
So the Glen Canyon Dam was a environmental advocacy group was responsible for creating the Glen Canyon Dam, basically.
You could put it that way. You could also put it as they were responsible for saving Echo Park from being dammed.
Right.
But so there's a book that was published about Glen Canyon called The Place No One Knew. It's a book of photographs that was taken after the dam had started to be constructed, and it was this kind of turning point for the environmental movement, where people stopped wanting to compromise as much, because when they started to see the photographs and see what was going to be flooded, people were really angry about it. And it's why the Glen Canyon Dam was the last major dam to be put up on the river, and one of the last ones we put up in the country, actually. They kept building dams a couple other places, and the thing that really put the nail in the coffin on that was the collapse of the Teton Dam, which flooded a couple towns up in the northern Rockies, and so that was like kind of the end of the dam building era in the 70s. But yeah, Glen Canyon Dam, it kind of galvanized both like the anti-dam movement, but really the environmental movement in general. And the history is pretty fascinating. There's a really good book, if you're interested, that it's about David Brower. It's called Encounters with the Archdruid, and it follows David Brower in conversations with a couple of his political adversaries. And the last half of the book is him taking a boat trip down the Grand Canyon with Floyd Dominy, who was the head of the Bureau of Reclamation, and they're the government agency who built all the dams in the Colorado River. And it's this like beautifully written piece, kind of, that's an ongoing debate as they're floating down the river over like who's right in this thing, because
wow.
Floyd Dominy, I mean, he was an empire builder, and in a lot of ways he's a government employee, and he was doing the will of the people. The people wanted to live in an opulent empire, and he delivered that to them. And he knows that it was controversial, and he's like, you depend on me.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff I've studied over the years about like the West, the imposition of the European psyche on the West.
Mm-hmm.
The desert landscapes are really hard for people to feel comfortable in and conceptualize life in, and like putting the lines, for years they couldn't figure out what to do with the area between the Great Salt Lake and the Sierras, and there's a lot of like fear of the wide open spaces, and
mm-hmm.
I think that piece is connected to this too, is like the being able to put order in the West helps people feel more comfortable, but also people want what's familiar, and that's the European garden, which I grew up in Virginia. It's very much a part of Virginia. Yeah. But like in the way it manifests here, it's very interesting because it's very different than Europe.
That's for sure.
And yeah, the opulence.
You can see that embodied just in the name of that government agency, the Bureau of Reclamation. and they build dams and they spread out water to irrigate, and it's like you're reclaiming the desert it's like it's this, I don't know, it evokes this kind of concept of a battle between good and evil. You're reclaiming something bad and turning it good by irrigating it.
That's connected to how indigenous people's land got taken too. I mean, I talk about this, we've talked about this on the podcast a bunch before, but also in my writing and classes, like, by seeing the land as not being used properly by indigenous peoples, it was one of the ways that it, you know, and there's a connection to Christianity and, like, that God gave this to European people, and there's a lot of layers to it. And people who are listening have heard other episodes where we've dug deeper into that piece of it, but, like, this idea of, like, well, the way the land was being used before was not good, not useful, not right, and we know because God gave us the land, you know, like, and we can take care of it, and we'll put the straight lines in, we'll change the water courses, we'll, you know, put the apple tree as a quintessential symbol, too, of colonization, you know, if we can plant an apple tree, then we will have a home, we'll be able to live here, and, like, ignoring that there's, like, wild gardens everywhere, and acorns and all kinds of other foods, and that people were intelligently tending the land before. So it's a part of that narrative. Erasing something that just is uncomfortable and doesn't resemble what the familiar, you know, and we're obviously becoming more aware of that now, but it is still really ingrained in the psyche for so many people. Yeah. So, and we're kind of stuck in it now. We have all these dams. Like, we're stuck in that psyche, in that system, even though many of us are realizing that it's not right and that, like, a lot of harm has been done and is still being done. But and that's the thing with a lot of the issues in the Colorado River Basin is once you do it, it's hard to go back. And that's both with dams and kind of the built landscape. It's like when you build a dam and you start diverting water to a city like Los Angeles, it's like, what are you going to tell those people to do? Yeah. It's like, if the water dries out, like, are you just going to tell them they should go somewhere else? It's like, sorry, 4 million people, you need to find a different home. It's like, it's very committing to do that, to build those infrastructure projects. But there's also this ecological piece that's committing too, where when you take the river that used to have giant floods and you flatten out that water flow so it's even throughout the year, you make it harder for the river to jump its banks. Right. And rivers all over the world, like, the sign of a healthy river is a river that periodically floods and will entirely change course. And in a place that had huge floods, like, the river might change course by not just by a matter of, like, oh, here's like 100 feet here or there that it's gonna, like, hop out and go over there. It might be like a couple miles away. And when you look at the history of, like, the Imperial Valley, it's like people wonder, like, how did all that soil get laid down by the river? And it's because the river would snake back and forth over, like, 50, 60 miles, and it would just fill in sediment as it went. And then a big flood year would come and it would jump 10 miles away and go deposit sediment there for a while. As rivers as bodies, as their own, like, beings and entities, rarely just look like a straight line where the banks never changed. It really was, all those fingers stretching out, and, you know, and beavers obviously were part of that. They create oxbows, little estuaries and things, and leave a little chunk of water behind and a bunch of fertility, allow a bunch of, you know, trees to germinate, and all of that created a dynamic, huge corridor of life and held more water on the land too.
But when you eliminate those floods and you don't let the river jump its banks, what happens is that the river, it'll start to cut a channel deeper and deeper in just where it is. And it loses its ability to jump its banks, where when you look at, like, we're on the North Fork of the Gunnison River here, and when you look at the river, it's like the amount of water it would take now for this river to be able to really jump its banks, it's not going to happen. It's impossible because it's been channelized for 100 years. So 100 years ago, the river hadn't cut that channel yet. It was still more mobile, and So the size of flood that was needed to move the river was not as big. But today, even like a 5-foot cut, which over 100 years, like cutting 5 feet down, kind of reasonable. I don't know what the exact figures are, but even a 2-foot cut, if the river cuts its channel 2 feet deeper over 100 years, like flooding an extra 2 feet is a lot of water. Last year we had some of the biggest flows on the North Fork that we've seen in the last 30 or 40 years, and the river ate away some banks on the farm where we rent land. The river ate away like 30 feet of a bank in one spot, but it's not going to be able to jump its banks completely and like get out of there, just because it's cut so far down.
And there's private property in town and everything all butted against it anyways, so
I know.
What incentive do people have to allow it to do that anyways?
Yeah, they don't want it to happen. And so we'll also like reinforce those, like the more vulnerable riverbanks where the river is kind of like having a lot of power hitting somewhere and eroding it away. We'll line that with rocks or concrete and make it so the river can't erode its banks. And then the only way for all of that energy to get used as the river's moving downhill is to cut even deeper into the ground and make it harder and harder for that system to change. And so on a larger river, like you see that everywhere, like through cities, through farmland, whatever it is, like people have channelized rivers. But one spot where there's a lot of conversation about this is in higher elevation ecologies, where you see beaver meadows that either the beavers were killed, and so there's not beavers, or the beaver dams were blown up and the meadows were drained to make more pasture for cows. And in those spots, when you channelize, you can imagine like a high elevation beaver meadow as kind of like a giant sponge, where as that beaver dam is built, like water backs up and soaks in and creates this huge storage area.
I remember on the Colorado Trail we camped by one of these that it felt like it was a mile long, a corridor where they did, they're leaving it alone, but we like camped there and walked up and down the whole a ways up, and it just went on and on and on, and it was just so cool to see like what it maybe would have looked like at one point everywhere.
But if you blow up those dams, take out the beavers, and you drain it, what happens is that river gets channelized through the meadow, and it acts as a drain. So it gets harder and harder for water to soak in there because you've like cut this drain through, and the river just keeps cutting deeper and deeper and deeper. And because to really get that water to soak into the meadow, you have to plug that up so water can like pool back up into that meadow. But the longer we wait to do that, to restore beaver habitat, things like that, the harder it gets.
Because it's exponential, basically, what you're saying.
Yeah, but there's a lot of conversation. I mean, I gave a talk about watershed education at a watershed conference a couple years ago. This conference called Sustaining Colorado Watersheds, and it's basically like a hydrology conference, and like watershed managers and scientists and people like that are there, and almost every presentation was about beavers. It was amazing.
Everyone's like, beaver fever, this is the solution. It's at least one bottom up type of solution anyways, like. Yeah. But there's still like this dislike of beavers because of the fact that they will do things that we don't like flood half the property. Property is having property is a huge deal. Every square foot is like worth something, So if the beaver compromises that and turns half of it into a floodplain, you can't use it to ranch, have cows or grow things, whatever. So it doesn't fit in that model of like needing to economically use the land. I wonder, use it or lose it in first in kind. Is that if you can't grow alfalfa because a beaver flooded your fields, does that count as being used? The water being used? No. I was hoping.
Beneficial use, although that legal definition has evolved over time, and the idea of beneficial use is evolving, where the rivers themselves can now have rights to have, like, they can have their own water rights.
That's good.
But it's all overlaid on this broken system, and that's one of the challenges of trying to solve some of the problems in the Colorado River, or I mean, really our whole world is like, you have a system. I think about 40 million people depend on the Colorado River, and it would be really fun to just say, like, you know what, like, we're gonna give all the water to the beavers now, and like, people need water to drink and people need food to eat, and the transition is not going to be an easy or quick one as you move forward in that. And so there are a lot of people doing really good work trying to solve issues, and there's headway being made. I mean, you mentioned earlier about the tribal water rights, and that's one of the areas that things are actually changing the fastest, is tribes are being awarded their water rights. And they're not as old as they should be. They're usually at the formation date of a reservation. But because the whole Colorado River Basin is a relatively recent development in terms of like water diversion, the reservations still have pretty old water rights. And yeah, I mean, I just saw a story about the Colorado River Indian tribes, it's this federally recognized tribe, but it's comprised of members of 4 different native nations, Hopi, Navajo, and they were just given authority to manage their water, not just as it flows through the reservation, but they can start working with water managers to like store their water rights in an upstream reservoir and things like that. And it essentially gives them the same governmental power that states have, and which makes sense because they're an independent nation legally, and they should have that authority. But I mean, that happened, I think, 2 days ago.
Wow, that's really exciting.
If people are looking for more resources on the Colorado River, probably one of the best sources of information right now is an organization called Water Education Colorado.
Okay.
And they have started putting out this email newsletter called Freshwater News that comes out sometimes, I feel like, every day. And there's new stories every time. It's like an aggregation of different water related stories, and the developments, it's happening so fast. Because I mean, water is huge and there's tons of people working on the issues. But there's always stories about new updates on the Colorado River.
So just to clarify, the upper quadrant gets a certain amount of water and the lower quadrant is supposed to. And so the upper quadrant, in Colorado especially, has a responsibility to make sure that a certain amount of water gets down past.
Yeah. Upper basin, lower basin.
Or that's what, yeah. Upper basin, lower basin.
But that's the legal requirement that essentially California pushed for. Was they're like, we don't care how much water there is. Like, it's the upper basin's responsibility to store the right amount of water behind dams and just give us our water every year. And so that's the legal requirement. And
there's a lot of economic power pieces in that too. But Arizona is a big ag. Believe it or not, I've driven through it. It's weird. They have a lot of agriculture there too. They're growing cotton. Or no, you were saying in the last talk they grow a lot of alfalfa for countries overseas.
Yeah, a lot of it's for export. Yeah, Arizona's a complicated creature because they do use a lot of Colorado River water, but most of the agriculture is happening with groundwater there. And a lot of Arizona's groundwater is what we would call fossil groundwater, where like the aquifers can recharge, but it's in such a dry place that essentially like it's just not going to happen within a human time frame. And yeah, so they're just draining their groundwater and it's not going to come back. Wow. But when the Colorado River, so Arizona developed their share of the Colorado River last of all the different states. And part of it is that they didn't really have a big population. And they also didn't have the political clout, because in the U.S., a lot of your political clout is tied to how big your population is in the House of Representatives. So California, was able to push for a lot of funding because they had tons of people. And Arizona did not. And so their portion of the Colorado River was largely developed through what's called the Central Arizona Project, which is a huge series of canals and pipes and pumps that brings Colorado River water uphill to Phoenix and Tucson. And it was finished like late 80s, early 90s. So it's very recent. Oh. And when that water finally got to farmers, it was too expensive. This project is so extensive that it was just like, it cost too much to buy that water. And so they kept pumping groundwater, and the cities ended up absorbing all that water. And Phoenix used it for development. Tucson, actually, a lot of what they do with their Colorado River water is they put it into this giant settling pond, and they just soak it into the ground. Because they're in a geologic basin that has a relatively shallow aquifer. And at first they started piping it through their city municipal system, but it was like reacting in a bad way with the pipes. And they're like, it's not going to work. And so they're like, we're just going to bank it underground. And they're like, yeah, we're shooting for about 100 years of water stored in the aquifer, which is the best way to store water underground. And it's a very interesting strategy, because as the river basin is drying up, there's a storm coming. People are going to be fighting over water a lot, and Phoenix is going to be one of the first places to start to dry out. They've already started cutting off some of their outlying suburbs. If they were relying on water trucks, they've already cut that. And those water trucks are driving around trying to find places to fill up. But Tucson is saying, we're gonna store all of our water and try to weather the storm.
I finally went into downtown Phoenix this past spring to try to harvest olives and citrus. I don't think it was worth it. That was before I came back up to Colorado. I was like, all right, I'm gonna get citrus and olives. I can do this. I was like, wow. Now I have a perspective of what downtown is, whatever downtown is like sprawling miles of madness, but is like, we had to go in the back alleys and stuff to find, and some of those little quaint areas are quaint and nice and have lots of plants and stuff, but it's like pretty depressing post-apocalyptic landscape. And I can't imagine this time of year, you just literally can't be outside.
It's baking there. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's such an interesting landscape. Phoenix, if you don't know the city, it's at about 1,000 feet of elevation, which for this region is very low, baking hot. Like summertime daily highs in like the 115 range. And yeah, a lot of people like it because the land was cheap when they were building there, and the winters are really nice. It's not super cold, but you still get a lot of like the outdoor opportunities that you get in the West. But Phoenix was actually built on the site of an old Hohokam city. And I feel like the city was about 2,000 years ago. But the Hohokam built giant canals.
Hohokam, okay.
Yeah. They built giant canals to divert water from the Salt and the Verde and the Gila rivers. And a lot of those canals were repurposed and are in use again today.
Whoa, so they're like ancient.
Yeah.
This is different than Tahoe to Odom. That's closer to the border.
Yeah.
Hohokam. Okay.
Hohokam, yeah, they're not a current group of people.
It's ancestral Puebloan, actually, right?
No, Puebloans were further north and east.
Okay.
Hohokam they're a separate group,
okay.
but
cool.
Yeah, they're. I think that I don't know as much about the history, but it seems like they faced big droughts there, and they couldn't keep the system going, and now Phoenix is facing the same thing. So, yeah, we've kind of had this meandering conversation where I've like put out different bits of information about the river and painted this picture that we have a river basin that like the primary users are actually outside of the river basin itself. And within the river basin, most of the water goes to agriculture. It's about 80%. I think they often like to point to like fountains at casinos in Las Vegas, and they're like, this is terrible. But really, like, you should be looking at like alfalfa fields, hay fields. That's where most of the water's going. And then when you get further downstream, you're looking at like giant fields of lettuce and cabbage and spinach in the Imperial Valley. And it's hard to imagine the scale if you haven't been there. Like, when you think about lettuce, I think most people, they're like, oh yeah, lettuce in my garden. And it's like a small patch. And like, here's 10 lettuce plants, and it's more lettuce than you can ever eat. And when you go to a lettuce field that's like 20 acres of perfectly straight lettuce rows, it's a different world. But all those lettuce rows in the Imperial Valley, I mean, it's supplying our whole country with winter vegetables. Anything leafy and green in the winter is coming from there, essentially. Unless you know where your vegetables are coming from, you can kind of just bet that they're coming from the Imperial Valley in the winter. And they're watered. There's these giant canals that snake through that region. There's a couple dams that divert water out. And they're mostly watered with overhead sprinklers. So you get these huge fields in the dry desert, and they're getting watered with these sprinklers. And of course, there's not enough water to like soak all that, like to saturate it all the way back down to the groundwater. That would take way too much water to do. So essentially, people are watering like the first foot of soil and keeping that wet. And when you're growing lettuce, that's all you need. Lettuce has really shallow roots, and you don't need to like be soaking things down like 5 feet deep. But in the desert, what that means is all that water that gets sprayed out into your lettuce field, it stays in the first foot of soil, and it either gets sucked up by a plant and evaporated, or it just dries out and it gets evaporated. Mm-hmm. So any salt that's in the water is left in that first foot of soil, which is a huge problem because the Colorado River is very salty. Here in Paonia, we have a rock layer called the Mancos Shale, and it's in a lot of western Colorado. It's an old ocean bottom sediment that's been lithified into this shale layer, and it carries a lot of salt because there used to be an ocean.
A lot of the sandstones are from the inland ocean, right? Mm-hmm. All these different eras of sandstone are salt-filled, semi-porous.
Yeah, unless layers. It was a wind-deposited sandstone, which I think it's like half and half.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so when you have your Mancos Shale layer up in Paonia, that salt, when it goes into the river, it travels all the way downstream, and it gets sprayed out into the Imperial Valley, and the salt gets deposited on the soil there. And if that's too much salt, like eventually you're not going to be able to grow food there. And this is something like every desert agricultural society has seen. There's still fields in like the Middle East and Mesopotamia that you can't grow things in because there's too much salt from desert irrigation. I mean, if we had like 100 inches of rain a year, that salt would have a chance to like percolate down into the soil, maybe get into the groundwater and get flushed through eventually. But when it gets deposited on the surface and then evaporates like that, there's nowhere for the salt to go. Mm-hmm. And so upstream in Colorado, we have all these open ditches in Paonia for our agriculture here. And there's a bunch of federal money coming in it's putting all the ditches into pipes. Because what happens when you have an open ditch, it's basically just flowing across soil. And when you have water flowing across soil, your water is going to soak into the soil. And you do that for a whole year, you're basically running an artificial river over the landscape, and a lot of that water is going to percolate back down, all the way back down to river level. And as it percolates through this Mancos Shale rock layer, it picks up salt. And then it rejoins the groundwater table and flows back into the river eventually, and all that salt is getting sucked out into the river.
That's interesting because we want water to be I mean, we're really literally right next to one of these ditches, next to this building we're in right now. When you have an amazingly large deciduous forest enclave here surrounding us because of the ditch.
Yeah.
But on the one hand, I think, okay, well, water on the land is creating, microclimates, ecosystems. It's like holding water in, but because it's flowing through, it doesn't necessarily operate the same way as like a beaver sinking it in. I guess.
I mean, the geology matters a lot.
It's really a geology is a huge factor.
The beaver is doing essentially the same thing, but the beaver is expanding an existing waterway. And when you bring water out from a ditch, like you're bringing it away from the river, sometimes like several miles away. And so you're incorporating like geologic areas that were not a part of the same like groundwater area, and you're joining that into the groundwater. So you're like flushing salt through, and eventually it rejoins the river through the groundwater. And so you're adding this area of salt that gets sucked in. So yeah, it's a little bit different because of that. But yeah, all this money that's coming in to pipe the ditches, a lot of people around here think that it's like government money trying to save water from evaporation or from like water infiltrating into the ground. It's like, okay, let's like conserve water, which is an added benefit, I think. But that groundwater is not getting lost. That's what you call like a non-exhaustive use of water. It's like you're pulling water out, it's flowing through the ground, and eventually it's going to go back to the river. And a lot of like flood irrigation and stuff, that's what happens to it. People see it as like wasting water, but it's hard to account for it in like a mathematical way. But the water doesn't just disappear. It goes into the ground. Probably within a couple months, it's back in the river. And yeah, it's primarily for salt, all those ditch piping projects. And it's also like, you hear numbers thrown out. It's like, oh, this project is costing $10 million to pipe this ditch. And if it's just for water conservation, like there's a lot better ways to spend that money. If you just want to find water to put in the river, you could just buy a farm. Or just pay a farmer to not grow something for a year. And be way cheaper. So yeah, they're putting all that money in because it's not that they want water, it's that they want the Imperial Valley to continue growing food.
But the two big lakes are probably adding more salt to the whole system than any of these little ditches, right?
It's true. The two big lakes, yeah. I mean, Lake Powell especially is a giant evaporation pond. And if you know anything about evaporation, salt does not evaporate. It just gets more and more concentrated in the water there. So if you look at like a salinity map up here, the water's not very salty, but by the time you get down to the Imperial Valley, the water is very salty. And it's because of all the evaporation loss from the river.
So the dams might be maybe the biggest cause of that.
They don't make things better.
Yeah.
I think that, yeah, you should probably address the source of the salt, but you should probably address that concentration factor too. One of my favorite proposals of things to like do to remedy some of the situation on the Colorado River Basin is to drain Lake Powell. There's an organization called the Glen Canyon Institute, and they have a very well-researched plan that they call Fill Mead First, Mead being Lake Mead downstream of Lake Powell, and both Lake Powell and Lake Mead are at about half capacity. And they're like, look, if you just take all the water from Lake Powell and flow it downstream to Lake Mead, you're going to gain water because it's not going to be evaporated. You're not going to, like, the salt concentrations won't be as bad. And you'll get this chance to restore this river corridor through Glen Canyon, which, yeah.
That would be trippy to see it exposed again, like what it looks like after all that.
Yeah. Mostly covered in silt.
Yeah.
It's all, that Glen Canyon Dam is just accumulating silt.
So it's just about time that they're going to have to take the dam out, probably. I mean, it seems inevitable, which is ironic, given all the
history of people wanting to blow it up.
Yeah, it's like acts of resistance, but now it might actually be completely necessary. So
yeah, I mean, there's also a lot of damage in some of the overflow tunnels there, and there's like it's gonna be a huge cost to repair those. I've started to think over the last couple of years that we're gonna see some real proposals to breach the dam, and maybe not to remove it, but at least to like significantly alter it or like blow a new drain into it or something.
silt and salt is an issue in this, because silt is, like making it harder for it to even be a functional thing.
But there's this question of like, when is that dead pool timeline? Like, when are we actually going to get to the point where you need to find a way to make the river flow past that dam? And if you get there, it's going to become really urgent. Like, I don't think that the American public is going to abide by the Colorado River drying up through the Grand Canyon. We would not like that. That's a very iconic thing, that river in that canyon.
Yeah.
And if you reach dead pool, it's going to be dry, because the Glen Canyon Dam is just 10 miles upstream from the Grand Canyon. I think that I haven't looked into any of like the serious talk around this for a while, but I think that there's going to be more and more talk about the possibility of needing to remove that dam.
Maybe in our lifetimes.
Maybe in the next decade.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a challenge there with like that. It's a big hydropower plant as well. But if you reach dead pool, it's not a hydropower plant anymore. You can't.
So there is like a civilization infrastructure that has been built around that too. That isn't so simple.
I mean, yeah, you could replace the power, but it's going to have to come from somewhere else. It's like where else are you going to get the electricity from?
So, solutions. Not to be just doom and gloom and like, what is the future? Because
we were just talking about solutions in our on our farm program on Wednesday, and I came in and I was like, we're going to talk about solutions, and eventually I was like, oh, there's not many good solutions for this problem. People often talk about water efficiency. They're like, oh, we need to like be more efficient with our water. And there's this author, I believe his name is David Owen, who wrote this book, Where the Water Goes. It's one of the more accessible books on the Colorado River. And he has a really good way of laying this out, where you talk about efficiency and you're like, cool, let's like stop watering lawns in Denver, and let's have people use composting toilets. Let's put all the farms on drip irrigation. And you can do all this stuff to save water. But if you imagine the world where you're only showering for 2 minutes a day, and you don't have a lawn, you don't have any irrigation needs in cities, all the farms are on drip irrigation, you've taken out the Glen Canyon Dam, and you're like, wow, we're using this water so efficiently. And then you have a drought. You're like, okay, what are we going to do? Who's going to stop drinking the water or eating the food first? And that's where you get to. So when you have a system that's as large and complex as this one, having leeway and like having that slack built into the system actually really helps. Like, you can just say, you know what? People can't water their lawns this year because it's a drought year, and you can just turn all that off, and suddenly you have a lot of drinking water. So the efficiency is kind of this double-edged sword. It's like, it does save water, and it also can put you into a really tricky situation down the road, where if you keep growing through those efficiency measures, you keep building more infrastructure, farming more land, expanding cities, like you're backing yourself into a corner. And I think that in our region we're coming up against this question that nobody wants to ask, which is like, how should we be living on this planet? And it's not that people don't want to ask the question, it's that people don't want to accept the answer, which is, we can't keep living the way we're living.
Yeah.
But the question is, like, who's going to take that leap first? Like, it's just like, nobody wants to give up their car because it represents a certain amount of personal freedom.
It's a big part of American culture, is have your own car. And out here, I mean, yeah, it does change how you exist. There's definitely people who live in this town who only have bikes and no cars, but then they can't get out into the wilderness or go get groceries 2 towns over where you can actually go and get certain things. So it's like, it really changes the way you exist
Yeah.
on land, you know?
But that same question is like, great, like who's going to give up their winter salad first? And like, you know, in the US, we talk about a diet of meat and potatoes as being a negative thing. And it's looked down upon. And it's like, man, for a place like North Dakota, like, what else is there? If you're going to eat a local diet, like, it's going to have to be heavy in those things that can store through a harsh winter. And yeah, I think that there's this really big need for us to look at our diet and ask, like, if we're going to deindustrialize our diet, what does it mean? Like, what does it mean to relocalize our food and to divest ourselves from the Imperial Valley and this idea of, like, a diet without seasons? And it's, yeah, I think people are going to have to go back to eating local wild greens in the springtime, which there's tons of. And people are going to have to change their ideas of what it means to eat healthily. And, I mean, it's tough, though, because it's, like, ingrained in us from childhood. Like, when I was growing up, we ate a leafy lettuce salad almost every day for dinner, no matter what the season was. And there were maybe some different things in it depending on the season.
And the convenience factor of, like, being able to go to the grocery store, which is an entity that really is new, very new. I try to explain to my students, like, it's hard for us to imagine a world without the grocery store, but if you could try to put yourself there, what kind of intelligent systems would people have out? They didn't just randomly roam around picking things to eat. Like, it was an intelligent system of interconnection, right?
Yeah.
That's hard for us to. It's just like putting the dam in. How do you go back after you put a dam in? How do you go back after there's a grocery store there? And it's uncomfortable, and the discomfort is really the bigger cultural change that we have to combat. And
that's something we do. You know, on our educational farm, we try not to buy fresh produce at all. Like, we're buying food to feed ourselves, but we're primarily purchasing dry goods. It's like dry grains and dry beans and oil and some spices, and everything else we're growing. And the diet is from season to season, it's highly varied, but from day to day it's very similar. It's like, a lot of people would say it's boring, and I often push back against that. I'm like, like, just because it's springtime and we're eating, like, these same steamed greens every single day, like, this is what humanity's future looks like.
Yep.
It's not a future of lack or of want. It's
abundance.
It is a future of abundance. It's just that the abundance, like, you don't experience it on a day-to-day basis. You experience it on a week-to-week or a month-to-month basis, like that diversity of diet.
Like berry season's coming up. You know, we have the orchards and stuff here that this valley's very fertile and very good for growing for a few reasons. And one is, like, the climate, the microclimate, the soil, all the ditches, the dams, the flood irrigated orchards like we're talking about. But there's a lot of wild fruit here too. Chokecherries and Saskatoons are huge bursts that happen, and like other like raspberry, like thimbleberries and stuff like that. And it's like this, you gorge. It's the time to gorge. You can dry some to extend your time being able to have your berry. It's like a huge, big nutrition burst. It's time to eat the berries, just like it's time to eat the greens. And you certainly could preserve them in certain ways for later, but it's just like people did historically.
There's lots of ways to preserve greens. This winter I was visiting a friend and coworker in the Himalayas in India, where I used to work, and I was learning about these cool practices of fermenting and drying mustard greens. And people don't need, like, I think we have to think about preservation as like canning, or like something that requires like a lot of infrastructure. And it's like these greens, like, you ferment them for a while and you dry them out, and then they last forever essentially.
Like, you don't need the mason jars with the lids. I've thought in the past, like, how do I put up the abundance without these freaking lids, because you can't reuse them because the pressure canning thing. That seems like a weird thing to be dependent on. But fermentation is a huge
Yeah.
thing. When I was in Asheville, North Carolina, we had people like Mark Williams, Sandra Katz. You know, there's a lot of fermentation culture, and it's like you don't need those like perfect industrial glass things
People
to
have been doing
ferment.
this forever.
And drying, I used to dry a lot of, especially wild greens, like even lamb's quarters, dandelion greens, and of course nettles, things like that. And then later you can rehydrate them. And
Yeah. But I mean, Sandor Katz, he talks about how like fermentation is like a radical political act. And this is part of why, is because it's not just like the kind of the faceless food system that you can't imagine. It's like, if we're going to live in a world that's coming for us, where the Colorado River cannot keep supplying the systems that we depend on, we need to find other ways of eating. And we need to not make it feel bad. We need to make that feel good. Because the future is going to look less industrial than it does. And that includes our lettuces in the wintertime. And it's like, we have to start cooking now.
yeah.
Make the food that you can eat locally and figure that out before you're forced to. Because there's so much creativity to be had too. That's the thing. Is like, when I look around the world, like all the different cuisines that people have devised, like people are so clever. They're like all the different stuff that we eat as human beings, it's tailored to the super local environments. I mean, even imagining like 150 years ago, just in the US, like you couldn't ship food anywhere. Like food is so heavy and shipping is so expensive that like people had to eat stuff that was grown. I mean, imagine carrying like a couple 100 pounds of winter squash somewhere.
I've done it, driving cross country.
Yeah.
In the back of my car.
It's a lot.
What am I doing?
It's a lot. And like...
Well, people also were a lot more nomadic. Certainly there were sedentary farmers, or semi-sedentary agricultural people, but a lot of people were nomadic, and they move, especially in Colorado, between the high country and the low country seasonally and gathering food, and this is where I really feel like it's important to think about like that dividing line between domestic and wild is really blurred. We have things like corn, beans, and squash that have had a human relationship for a long time, that they depend on humans to carry them through. Like they wouldn't exist without us replanting them. But there are a lot of other plants that blur that line, that were a part of people's movements across the landscape, and we can't fully conceptualize it now because we have this pressure to be sedentary in the boxes of private land, and that the food systems also were just like how the bison moved, like in flows, how the river moves. People move that way, and they planted their gardens or tended their foods, and that was resilient, and if we can't have those flows as people too, that's a problem. But yeah, this is that bigger cultural infrastructure thing that you're like, well, how do we find that? How do we subvert the problem while we live in it,
Yeah.
And in small ways. So I think fermentation even is just one small act, or gathering wild food seed and replanting, for future generations is one small act.
Or even just growing a single plant that you're going to eat, if like in a garden somewhere. People often ask me, they're like, what have you learned about like the food system after running an educational farm program? And I'm like, the thing that I've learned is that everybody needs to be involved in food production.
Yeah.
No matter what it is, whether it's wild food, whether it's growing an apple tree or a tomato plant or a lettuce or...
And then some people I've had ask me like, well, I don't have access to that. I live in a city. I don't have access to land to grow things. And they ask, well, what can I do? And often one of the things I say is that like there is nature in urban areas. There are places that need our attention and tending that do affect things too in a bigger way, and there are ways that we can incorporate more of this in these highly concentrated population centers. We could have designed our cities totally differently. And so whether it's like tending plants along a riparian corridor in the city, or whether it's advocating for getting this cement zone in between the highway like turned into like a pollinator corridor. Like there's always something. Like I knew people in Brooklyn who had beehives on top of the roofs, and yeah, I think the urban areas are even more ripe for creative potential for how to bring food into where the people are. So but even if you don't have a traditional farm plot to grow things in, you can still do something.
So yeah, what you're talking about reminded me of this passage from a book called The Unlikely Peace at Cuchumachik by Martine Prechtel. The whole book is about corn seeds, essentially, is my interpretation, and a little bit about like it's kind of like developing new cultures rather than trying to emulate old cultures. It's like taking the world as it is now and trying to move forward. But here we go. Turn that worthless lawn into a beautiful garden of food, whose seeds are stories sown, whose foods are living origins. Grow a garden on the flat roof of your apartment building. Raise bees on the roof of your garage. Grow onions in the iris bed. Plant fruit and nut trees that bear. Don't plant ornamentals, and for God's sake, don't complain about the ripe fruit staining your carpet and your driveway. Rip out the carpet. Trade food to someone who raises sheep for wool. Learn to weave carpets that can be washed. Tear out your driveway. Plant the 9 kinds of sacred berries of your ancestors. Raise chickens and feed them from your garden. Use your fruit in the grandest of ways. Grow grapevines. Make dolmas, wine. Invite your fascist neighbors over to feast. Get to know their ancestral grief that made them prefer a narrow mind. Start gardening together. Turn both of your griefs into food. Instead of converting them, convert their garage into a wine, root, honey, and cheese cellar. Who knows, peace might break out. But if not, you still have all that beautiful food to feed the rest and the sense of humor the holy gave you to know that you're not worthless because you can feed both the people and the holy with your 2 little able fists.
Whoa. He's such a good writer.
I know.
When I was living in Barnardsville, North Carolina, a lot of people had studied with him, and I felt like that was a place just like Paonia with this, lots of people kind of trying to put that into practice, Sometimes failing and sometimes succeeding, just like here, but that sort of celebratory abundance. But this is something I come to a lot in the ecology classes, and I've been thinking about a lot is we can't romanticize the past and try to recreate it. This is a thing in conservation too. That's a big conversation, is that we can't necessarily museumify this idea in the past and plant it back here, be like, this is what it has to be. We have to be exactly what he says. Like, I think the role of creativity in this futurism mindset, there's like a whole new way we have to imagine.
I agree with that.
Yeah,
and when it comes to this river basin, I mean, it's like it's wormed its way so deep into like the modern imperial way of life and the way that we think and conceive of ourselves as human beings in the world, and what's good and what's right and what we should be working for. And to take a step outside of that, I mean, you're gonna fail pretty miserably, because we're trying to kind of invent a different way of doing things in the world. But I think that like in the trying, that's like if you do it well and do it beautifully, that's all we can ask. And whether that's like working on policy, I think that this week on the farm, as we've been talking about the Colorado River, some of our fellows, the food systems fellows, they were like, this is really overwhelming and I don't know what the answer is. We started comparing it to the character Lauren in the book Parable of the Sower.
Oh, yeah, Octavia Butler.
Well, yeah, because she lives in Los Angeles. And I'm like, that's part of the, like, that is the future of the Colorado River Basin.
She's brilliant. Was brilliant, yeah.
Like, that's the future of this region, is, like, waiting for rain so you can fill your, like, cisterns. And she's living in a Los Angeles that's, like, experiencing climate meltdown. We talked about how she packs a bag, and she's ready for it. She knows it's coming, and she like starts this like creating the skills and like getting the resources together, not to like fight it, but to ask what's next. And in her bag are like there's seeds. That's what she's carrying with her. And like she doesn't have any like what's the word? There's no like illusion that like, oh, I'm just gonna go like find some easy life somewhere. She's like, this is gonna be crazy. And so we started talking a little bit about kind of this way of like facing these harsh realities of climate change and of drought in this region, and asking like what do you do to start like packing a bag, this like metaphorical bag, as a society, and where do we go next, and what do we bring with us, and how do we prepare for that, which they're questions that we're just not asking. When you look at like oh, people are talking about drought and climate change, and it's like, oh, we can like reduce, like Denver just put in this non-functional grass lawn ban, so like you can have a sports field still, but you can't install like grassy strips around your office building.
What about golf courses?
That's functional. That's the thing. It has a function. Whether or not you agree with the function that's something else. But like a 2-foot wide grassy strip, there's like it's a decorative thing. So, and I mean, what's crazy is like that piece of law probably took so many people to make happen, and I would love to applaud their effort, and it's worth doing that.
Sometimes we are pushed to change these cultural things because it ends up being the easiest thing over blowing up a dam. It's like, you know what, we need to let go of our attachment to lawns. You know, the lawn is this European psyche thing too, around control and the English garden, and it really is harmful, like, attachment that we have, that we don't need lawns.
Yeah.
We don't. Like, I mean, people at East think they need it to keep the ticks at bay, but that's a whole other conversation, but it's like, we don't need lawns, and if that's the first thing that we can, like, challenge, then that's a big step. Because it is, when you think solutions, bottom up and top down, if you want to think of it linearly, or side to side, up and diagonal, whatever, but like policy is kind of a big piece, but it is sort of subtle and somatic too, which is kind of right here. Yeah. And of course, having a little seed bundle you gather as an individual is like maybe a bottom up thing. Yeah. But yet a seed can create so much. So really, is there one that's
all the change is all connected, and that's I think like there's a lot of cool things happening in this river basin that make me hopeful. Like, people are aware of the problems, as many people as there are who ignore the problems or like don't want to look into it. There's a lot of good things happening too, and there's the legal structure is complicated, but there's changes happening to it. Like, tribes are getting their water rights, and there's like top-down government regulation, like then states are going to have to abide by some of these water cuts. And at the same time, like, you can't just keep pushing the system and like saying like, oh, since we're using less water, we can still grow. Since we're using less water, we can still farm alfalfa in the desert. Like, we've got to change those things and work on this, like, envisioning something different rather than just kind of prolonging the same thing.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of cool stuff happening. And I would say, like, it's really easy to feel overwhelmed, especially, like, if you're listening to this and you live in the Colorado River Basin, or, like, you drink water from this. It's, like, easy to feel overwhelmed. And then you remember it's, like, oh, any single piece of this puzzle, it's, like, we talked about that effort to remove the Glen Canyon Dam, or to at least, like, drain it and fill Lake Mead first. Like, the Glen Canyon Institute has been working on that for decades. And like, the amount of money and resources it takes to do those individual pieces, it's like, it's a lifetime of work for many people. And like, you just gotta find what you can do and do that. A lot of it starts with just like getting to know the system too, because if this is the first time you're hearing about the Colorado River and that, like, you're eating the river in your vegetables, that's a great first step.
Some people just don't know and have no idea. Like, I think often people don't realize how big some watersheds are and how interconnected they are, you know. Certainly there's places where the watersheds are really tiny, but in this case it's huge, and so many people, places, other living beings are affected by the small things and the big things that happen along it. So.
Yeah. and you would not be alone in not knowing about this. I mean, I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, and it's like when I was born, my blood was Colorado River water, and I didn't know that until I was 19 years old.
How can people find out about Groundwork stuff and then get involved in different ways?
Yeah. Groundwork. Well, the easiest way to find out about what we're doing is by visiting our website, www.layinggroundwork.org, and you can see all the different things we do. We have been sponsoring these ecology courses that Kelly is a teacher of, and people come out of those really just with a very different lens they're looking at the world through.
And Nikki Hill's a teacher too this year, who has been on the podcast like 3 times.
It's astonishing to see people, even after like a 4-day course, what they come out with. And I get emails from people sometimes saying like, I'm still like blown away by like how I'm just experiencing day-to-day life differently after this, and what it's making me see and like look more critically at in the world, both in like the plants that they see, but also like the political structures and kind of just the way that we're conditioned to move through the world. So gotta shout out those programs. And yeah, we run an educational farm in Paonia, Colorado, with a 7-month food systems fellowship program. We teach traditional crafts, basketry, hide tanning, various other things. Pottery, weaving, spinning. And yeah, we run, I think in the next year we're going to be launching some more classes on things like the Colorado River, and looking at, how do we dive deeper into these questions about people's connection with place and what that means for our society moving forward. Website, www.layinggroundwork.org. We'd love to have you on a program. We're always looking for donors to support our work. Running a nonprofit, we rely so much on donor support, and it wouldn't be possible to do this kind of work without that. Living in our society that's so focused on productivity, if you're either challenging that or doing something like education work that's not as quote-unquote productive, you always rely on the generosity of donors.
You just listened to a conversation with Jeff Wagner of Groundwork. Don't forget to support the podcast by subscribing to Substack. Groundshots.substack.com is how you get there. You can also Venmo or PayPal us. Our Venmo is Kelly-Moody-6. Other ways to support the podcast you can find on our website or on Substack. Music at the beginning of this episode was by Jason Day West and Darian Lane, and this outro music is Mother Marrow, as always. This podcast was supported by Traditional Tanners. Find them at braintan.com. All right, you guys, until next time, I really hope you can take in all of this information and integrate it and take action in your lives around the Colorado River, which we all eat. Take care.
Cedar splits, I offer sweat and splinters. Forest elders breathe their last. I'll bring